you have more control than you think to shape what's happening around you. And I think that's important for HSPs and sensitive strivers to hear because
Mm.
we often feel at the whim of everything that's happening around.
Welcome to Sensitive Stories. This episode is for educational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for treatment with a mental health or medical professional. Let's dive in. How has your relationship to your sensitivity changed since you've discovered that you're highly sensitive?
I feel like discovering I was highly sensitive was like pieces of a puzzle coming together. And most of all, it was very reassuring and it was very relieving to know that nothing was wrong with me. I wasn't broken or somehow defective. And also that I wasn't alone because
Yeah.
I think I felt like I was the only person who struggled with some of the things I struggled with. And so it was really nice to know that I was not alone. And I think the
Mhm.
overall feeling was it actually allowed me to be much more objective about challenges I faced, even strengths that I had, because I realized this is part of my biology. It's part of how I'm wired. It just is. It is just a fact that is neutral. And having that self-knowledge just changed so much about how I could manage myself, my day, the types of environments I put myself in. So, yeah, I think it also led to a level of acceptance too. Again, that I didn't have this level of shame over everything.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you saying that because it is neutral, isn't it? It is a fact that we have this traits and it comes with certain qualities and gifts and things to offer. I'm wondering, would would you mind sharing one of those gifts that you've noticed over the years that you bring to the table?
Yeah, I am very intuitive. So I think
Mm.
the idea of being very aware of the environment, changes in people's body language or different dynamics. I'm the person where we could go out to dinner with a bunch of people and I could say something was off with so and
Mhm.
so. And my husband will say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And
Yes.
then a few weeks or months later, oh, that person is leaving their job or what have you. Something
Mm.
comes up where it's like, see, I knew something was
Yes.
up there. So just being able to sense those shifts in the environment has been incredibly helpful. And again, something that I thought everyone can do this.
Yes.
But what I've learned over time is often the things that come easy to
Mhm.
us, those are our strengths, those are our gifts.
Yes.
Yet they're the very thing we discount as unimportant.
Exactly. It's true. I hear this from so many clients that I work with. I've had this my experience myself where we assume our experience is the universal experience, which makes sense. It's the only experience that we know. But if we look closer, especially for sensitive, we all have different gifts and strengths, but for sensitive people, we bring a certain qualities to the table, and intuition is a big one, right? Being able to sense something in a room and not knowing maybe why you know it, but you know it. It's true. And it can be difficult to trust that, to believe it when, like you said, when others around you, like your husband, are not picking up on it. So, how do you lean in and say, I know this is truth for me? I know I can trust my intuition. How do you,
Mm,
yeah, how have you been able to do that?
yeah, it's such a great question because it it's very ethereal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Intuition is not, and especially when you hear the word intuition, it's been used often in very mystical
Mm-hmm.
context. But in psychological terms, intuition is really just the collection of all of your experiences and
Right.
the data you've taken in.
Mm-hmm.
And as more sensitive people, this, we're not only scanning the environment and taking in more bits of information, we're also processing that more deeply.
Yes.
And so thinking about it that way, that this is not some magical quality I have, but it's really a strength of being able to tap into, synthesize, make
Mhm.
connections and conclusions out of my past experiences. That has made it so much more concrete for me, and a strength where now I can lean into it and know, based on my experience, there's been a pattern here in the past. Does that mean every situation is going to be like that?
Mhm.
No, but
Yeah.
it helps me predict. And also, especially as a coach in this line of work,
Mhm.
being able to sense what's going on for people, to read between the lines, or notice someone's tone of voice shifts when they start talking about a subject, being able to sense like there's something going on here, and actually speak to that and say, "Hey, I noticed when you talked about this aspect of your job, your voice got really flat. What's
Mhm.
going on with that?" And that could unlock a huge
Oh yeah.
aha for someone to say, "Oh, I never realized that before." And so
Exactly.
just having the enough courage to do that over time and have it go well, again,
Mhm.
gives me confidence in that, you know what, if I try it and I put something like that out there, what is the worst that could happen? The person says, "No, actually, your perception is not right." But 9 times out of 10, it just adds so much to my relationships, my work, whether it's
Mhm.
personal or it's professional.
Absolutely. It there's two opportunities there. One is to help the person deepen their own insights about themselves, being a mirror for them. Or two, it allows you to understand them more and let them explain, process their own experience, inform you of that
Mm-hmm.
experience. So it's for me, it's a win-win either way. Whether you get it right or wrong, there's still a deepening and a knowing. And I love that. And I appreciate that you said intuition is also often objective based on data, not
Mm-hmm.
always, but when it's true. And we can lean into that and recognizing when that intuition is correct and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing how often we get it right and not dismissing that. Ah, so good.
Yeah, and when I talk about this with my clients, we often talk about it as the skill of discernment.
Yes.
And discernment is making sense of a situation, and most of the time figuring out what's truth here or what's right for me in this situation.
Hmm.
And I mean, there's a reason my book is called Trust
Trust
Yourself.
yourself. I was just thinking that.
It's
Perfect.
yeah, and it's because many times, as sensitive people, we've
Yeah.
had our experiences invalidated our
Yeah.
entire lives. Stop being so sensitive. You're taking things too
Hmm.
personally, aka your perception of the world is not right. Look at it a
Exactly.
different way. That it really is a muscle to discern, like, what
Yes.
do I want in this situation? What am I feeling? What do I think
Hmm.
is right here? Is really a muscle you need to rebuild and practice.
Yes, exactly. It is all about learning to trust yourself. And it does take practice. It takes time to unravel all those messages. You're too sensitive, you're not enough of this or that. Um, yeah, and it's possible to do that.
Yeah.
So I know another label or another way you identify as a sensitive striver, which I love this term. It's one I identify with myself. It's one you've coined during your work with your coaching. Can you describe what that means for folks who aren't familiar?
Yes. The simplest way to describe it is a sensitive striver is someone who is highly sensitive, and add on the high achieving piece.
Mm-hmm.
High achieving doesn't necessarily mean you're in the C-suite, you're gunning to climb the corporate ladder. High achieving means you are very driven. You set a lot of goals for yourself. You may have big goals and ambitions for your career, but it's really, what I have found is, um, many highly sensitive people are also very gifted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very highly intelligent. And that drive, that level of inner drive can come with tremendous strengths. But
Mm-hmm.
again, much like all of our traits, there's a flip side to it if we are not able to recognize it, or we don't have the tools, or we're not able to manage it correctly.
Right.
So sensitive strivers tend to, again, they have the high sensitivity aspect where they feel and think things deeply, but they may also struggle with what I call the honor roll hangover. which
Mm.
is the sort of A plus gold star student mentality of I have to
Yes.
get all the A pluses, I have to be the rule follower, the good boy or girl. And so there's a mix of people pleasing in there as well. Perfectionism also tends to come into play a lot. Over functioning, where you are taking on more responsibility than is yours.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's the plus sides and downsides.
Right. I know a lot of HSPs do overperform, overfunction, whether it's at work or in their family life, in their relationships, in every aspect of their life.
Mhm.
Um, Wanting to, I think, buffer against a lot of that criticism we faced throughout our lives in different ways. And you talked about, there's a lot of gifts to being a sensitive striver. I'm wondering if you could speak to, for those HSPs who think and feel so deeply and often forget that value that they bring at work, could you speak to what some of those gifts are?
Yeah. And I'm sure you've come across this stat, which is that managers tend to rate people who are more sensitive as their top performers. And it's
Yes.
precisely for a lot of the reasons we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Sensitive people tend to ironically be great at things like sales and marketing because they understand other people's needs. They're
Yes.
very highly empathetic and they can connect with other people. We
Mm-hmm.
tend to be conscientious and thoughtful.
Yes.
We I think a lot of sensitive people would label themselves as risk averse when in
Mm-hmm.
fact we tend to be strategic risk takers. We
Oh,
tend to
that's
be
true.
thoughtful, right, and considerate about what are the upsides, what are the downsides here. Let's make the best choice possible.
Mm-hmm.
um, we also tend to be very diplomatic communicators because we're considering what's the impact of our statements before we say them. And we're
Mm-hmm.
often not the people in the workplace who are speaking just to be heard. We are speaking to add value and to add nuance to a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think one thing I've also seen too is that sensitive strivers tend to be the people that see problems or see opportunities a bit earlier than others,
Yes.
which sometimes they may second guess themselves because they'll say, well, I see this, but no one else does. Why isn't anybody else saying something?
Right.
And it's often because you're one or two steps ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people tell me that, again, that's another aspect to lean into, that you have that unique perspective to
Mm-hmm.
speak up about. So don't always second guess yourself on those things.
Right. It goes back to trusting your intuition, remembering all the times where you did see something one or two steps ahead, uh, to help you maybe gather the strength or
Yeah.
the bravery to speak up. Because I know I get asked this question a lot: is how can I speak up more in meetings? How can I allow my voice to take up space at work when others aren't seeing things the way that I see them? Wonder if you have any thoughts on that. I'm sure that's something you've dealt with in your coaching.
All the time. Yes, all the
Mm-hmm.
time. A couple of things. I think speaking up in meetings actually happens way before you even
Mm.
get into the conference room or join the Zoom call.
Okay.
And for us as sensitive people in April, you can tell me if this has been your experience
Mm-hmm.
too. But I find we need to feel a level of comfort and safety with the people around us.
Definitely.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and if we don't feel that, or even if we don't feel we have enough context on the people in the room, the situation, we're more hesitant to speak up.
Yes.
And so getting to know the people in the room, whether many times a lot of folks that I work with, probably you work in very matrixed, cross-functional environments. They may be in rooms with people that are in levels of positional power above them, or that they've only met on Zoom a few times. So actually being intentional about building those relationships, getting to know people through 20-minute coffee chats,
Mm-hmm.
or if you do have to, let's say, bring a decision or you need to present something to people in the room, having the meeting before the meeting to
Mm.
to debrief them on, hey, here's how I'm planning to present this. How does this land with you?
Yes.
What questions do you have so I can make sure I address them, so you feel more confident going into that, and your mind doesn't spiral and fill in the gaps with all negative perceptions of what could happen. So getting comfortable beforehand so you feel more comfortable speaking up in the moment. And as uncomfortable as it can be, challenging yourself to speak up early on. So being one of the first, I would say first three to five people to speak in the meeting. And again, this isn't about just talking for talking's sake, but it's about overcoming your own fear, because the longer the meeting goes on, the more likely that it is all the good ideas will be out on the table. You'll convince yourself people have checked out. I shouldn't say anything now.
Right.
Um, and the more your resistance will build. And so if you speak up early on, it builds your confidence with saying something early. And you don't have to say something groundbreaking. You can ask a thoughtful question. You can build on what somebody else has said. Like, John, that was a great idea. Something else I considered is XYZ. So there's something here around letting go of the perfectionistic idea that it has to be this breakthrough share that nobody else has ever considered or thought of. Take that off, but you get used to using your voice and get other people used to hearing your voice as well.
Exactly. You can be the connector at times, the
Yeah.
mirror at times, just to help bolster this conversation. I
Yeah.
appreciate that permission to allow it to be imperfect. Yeah. And also to support your sensitivity. We're great at building relationships as HSPs. And that's something we can do one to one in shorter bursts. Like you said, those 20 to 30-minute coffee breaks or chats. And then preparing ahead of time is so crucial. So your nervous system is familiar with what might happen. I know Dr. Aaron talks about this a lot. Like, get in the room if you can before you have a presentation. Familiarize yourself with the person that you're going to be talking with. Go to the restaurant ahead of time if you have an important dinner. How can you take away as many unknowns as possible? So important. And
Yeah.
you can do this all in the workplace.
Yeah. And if I could add to that. So I
Please. Yeah,
love
this
the
is
point.
exciting.
Yeah. I love the point about try to make it as real as possible. That's something. So I do a lot of speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and something I've started requiring when I speak in person is that I have the ability to get in the room at least 2 hours, if not the day before the event, because I've had too many situations where my first time seeing the stage, seeing how big it is, where the screen is 15 minutes before I have to give my talk. And that sends, to your point, the unpredictability just sends my level of stimulation
Hey.
through the roof. And then I can't show up in the best way. So that's a great example of understanding your wiring, being able to ask for what you need, which is a perfectly reasonable request.
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing I'll add to the suggestion of, try to settle into the room. Um, Lowering your level of stimulation before you get into these types of situations.
Yes.
So everyone is very busy. We're all stressed out, HSPs and sensitive strivers
Mm-hmm.
more so.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go into a meeting and your level of stimulation is already at an 8 or a 9 out of 10, any little situation is going to send you into that really debilitating fight or flight state.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
so if it's, 5 deep belly breaths,
Mm-hmm.
I have some clients who create a pre-meeting protocol where,
Mm.
okay, I have my notes, I have my water, I've checked I have the right Zoom link, I've
Yeah.
had a bio break. And that's sort of their warm-up ritual that calms them down, gets them in the zone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then one other very practical thing is try not to have back to back to back to back to back meetings. I know that is easier said than done,
Mm.
but if you have the ability to even take 1 hour meetings, make those 50 minutes or 55 minutes. 30-minute meetings, make them 20 or 25 minutes. So you have just that little bit of buffer where you can catch up on emails, you can take a breath. And you and I know from being therapists for so long that
Yes.
there's a reason our sessions
Or
are
50
full,
minutes
yeah, are
or
50 minutes.
45 minutes. Exactly.
So we have a little space in between. And
Exactly.
I've just found that has made that just small little shift has made such a huge difference for so many people I work with.
It's true. Like you said, work with your wiring, know your nervous system. It's going to be more impacted by stimuli and input. And I think this is the thing that people don't realize, and my clients are always really astounded by. It just takes a little, right? That differential susceptibility, where we are more impacted by the positives.
Mhm.
5, 10 minutes makes a big difference. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it can be groundbreaking when you have that throughout your day.
Mhm.
Just to take a moment to decompress, to check in, so you're not worrying about what emails have come in during that last meeting or the 3 back-to-back meetings. Yeah, what little tweaks can you make? So important. I love that. Ah,
Can I add one thing to that?
please too. Yeah, please do.
Which is, yeah, yes, literally, physiologically, it makes a huge difference.
Yes.
And I think also psychologically and emotionally, it's a
Mhm.
very strong signal to yourself that you matter, right? I
Right.
respect myself enough to do these things. And,
Hmm.
I always like to tell my clients that self trust is built by the promises you keep to yourself. That is how, because again, all of us are many sensitive strivers or as HSPs, we will put everyone else's needs ahead of our own, which sends the signal to yourself that I'm not important.
Yeah.
Everybody else is more important than me. And it's not necessarily, I like to say, you don't need to prioritize your needs over others,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't need to necessarily put yourself first. You need to make yourself equal to
Ooh.
other people. At least give yourself that your needs are just as important as other people's, and you need to send that signal to yourself as well.
I really appreciate that because we often do put ourselves at the bottom of the list. And then the perfectionism, the guilt takes control. And then we're constantly feeling overstimulated, even burnt out, which has a very significant impact on the way we're able to work. So, yeah, how can we signal to ourselves it's okay to
Mhm.
put yourself on an equal plane? And I think that's the worry is we often think, oh, I'm putting myself ahead. And that makes us uncomfortable a lot of times as
Yeah,
HSPs, but we're just putting ourselves at the same level. That's it. That's okay to
exactly.
do.
Yes,
I really
exactly.
appreciate
It's not
that.
about superiority.
That's
Yeah.
right. It's just
Mhm.
about getting our needs met. So, how do we do this? So, when you said a lot of supervisors, managers will rate their HSP employees the highest, which makes sense. We're bringing a lot to the table. How do we communicate our needs and these gifts to the people that manage us if we're in that
Yeah.
role?
Yeah. I am a huge advocate of having what I call the styles conversation, which
Mm-hmm.
is with your manager, the other key people you work with, having a conversation about how you work, you and them. So you have the opportunity to share. These are some of the preferences I have. I know for sure, I'm speaking me personally as Melody, that I am the type of person, if, April, before we met today, you sent me the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That is
Yeah.
that is the most I can ask. I like to show up prepared. I like to know what I'm walking into. And so if someone is able to communicate with their boss wherever possible, I like to be able to show up and make sure I'm making my best contribution. And to help with that, having the agenda or having questions I can prepare or even just thought starters is really helpful for me. All the way to things like when in terms of feedback, if you ever have to give me feedback, it helps me if you could start by telling me what's going well and what's
Yes.
going right before we get into what could be better.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I have some people that will say, I don't mind if you grab me at the end of a meeting and give me some feedback then, whereas other people would say, I would actually prefer to meet once a month and talk about those things. So this is where it's on us as HSPs to figure out what actually is going to allow us to do our best work, whether that's how we want other people to communicate with us, give us feedback, What are our boundaries around our work hours? What type of work we really enjoy doing, don't enjoy doing? How do
Mhm.
we learn best? What's what does it look like when we are at our best versus not at our best?
Mhm.
All of those sorts of things, it can be really helpful to think about. And I call this putting together a me manual. So
Mm.
basically, a manual of me. You don't necessarily have to share that and say to your boss, here's exactly all of my demands and everything I want. But think of it as a conversation starter for
Mm.
that. And it can be really helpful to then ask your manager, if I have a question, I need to ask of you, what's the best way to do that? Do you prefer email? Do you want me to pick up the phone? Should I text you? Those little things can go so far to, number one, teaching people how to treat you,
Mhm.
because we do that through our behavior. But also taking away so much second guessing
Yes.
from, I don't understand why this person is being so short with me. Why every time I email them, they only send me back 1 second. They don't even say, hi, how are you? And understanding that that may just be somebody else's style, whereas you
Mhm.
as an HSP may have a higher preference and drive for context and connecting with someone before you get into the business of things. And
Mhm.
so it can just take away so much of the taking things personally or reading into situations.
Hmm. I appreciate that you're highlighting again that there's an equalness here, equality here. You know, it's a reciprocity. It's
Mhm.
not me coming in with my demands. This is what I need to work, which is you also want to bring some of
Yeah.
that, but also asking, how do you work best? How can we collaborate here? How
Yes.
can we support each other? Um,
Mhm.
what do you do when someone is short on an email and you like context and there's maybe a different style? Can we navigate that? Is that workable?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. Depends on the situation, of course, always, but
Mhm.
absolutely. And I should also add to that that as sensitive people, we may have to flex our
Mm.
style here and there to get people to hear us more.
Mm.
And so when you think about someone that tends to be a shorter, more concise, maybe dominant communicator, you as an HSP may need to adjust a little bit to lead with your bottom line
Mm.
instead of saying, here's how we got to this decision, here's the people I consulted, here's the history of this. You lead with, this is my request for you. Are you able
Mhm.
to do this? And then from there, you could say, what other information do you need? And then you can get into all of the particulars. Um, and so I think it's about knowing who you're dealing with and how to speak with them so that you get what you need out of
Mm.
the exchange.
Mhm. I appreciate that you're kind of stacking the requests slowly and introducing new levels.
Yeah.
Well, first, this is the first step. Here's what I need, and then what do you need? And then we're kind of building from there,
Yeah.
slowly letting more of that me manual contents out onto the page.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Exactly.
I love
Exactly.
that. And that's how all relationships are, right? The best relationships are they're reciprocal, there's compromise, we're working collaboratively together. It's not one-sided. So we're bringing that same concept to work.
Yep.
Love it. And let's say someone struggles to put themselves into the picture at all, right? You know, you're letting that empathy, that guilt,
Yeah.
that perfectionism, the tendency to overperform drive you. How can you manage that and not slip into burnout? How can
Mhm.
we allow more of our needs to show up and less of the guilt, you know, driving the show?
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Yeah, there's a chapter in the book where I talk about
Mm-hmm.
setting boundaries. And one of the tools for that is what I call the four feelings test,
Mm-hmm.
using our emotions as data.
Yeah.
And I'll just focus in on one of the four feelings that's most important, which is resentment.
Mm-hmm.
Resentment is a very strong emotional signal that you have let a situation go on for too long, or you feel undervalued or overlooked. And that is a very sure sign that you need to start setting some limits, have a hard conversation, start saying no.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because I work with so many people that don't even know where to start. They feel so overwhelmed and burned out that they can't even prioritize what needs to come off their plate or what needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so use your emotions as a signal to help you prioritize what needs my attention the most.
Yeah.
So you may feel resentful. I see this all the time where people will have said to a colleague, sure, I can help you with that. Yep, I can sit in on that committee, or yep, I can pitch in with that project. And it's now 6 months, a year later, and every time you see an email come in for that, your blood just
Yeah.
boils.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very good sign rather, that it's time to reset the dynamics, to say,
Mm-hmm.
when I initially agreed to this, I had the bandwidth. The situation has changed. So I'd love to work with you to create a plan so I can transition off of this within the next 4 weeks, because
Mm-hmm.
these other projects need my attention.
Yeah.
So really starting with that, I think, is a great place. And uh, just building on that, there's
Mm-hmm.
one technique I love. We use this all the time in my coaching programs, which is the positive no,
Mm.
which is a nice person's way of saying no. Basically, I can't do X, but I can do Y. So
Yes.
it's offering a reasonable alternative.
Mm.
So at work, that may be, I can't get everything to you by the 15th, but I could by the 30th. How does that sound? Right? It could be negotiating the timeline, the scope. It could
Mm-hmm.
be offering to help in some smaller capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But it's looking for a workable compromise, because in the workplace, you have to be a team player,
Right.
right? But there's a line there. You don't want to be a team player to the point that you hurt yourself. So the positive no straddles that line of,
Mm-hmm.
I want to pitch in and help out, but I want to set some limits about around how that's done.
Right. I love that. It's not a black and white. There's room in the middle. There's some gray. If you do find yourself in a place of I've taken on too much, I've overcommitted, there's a way to back out graciously. Just saying things have changed. I love that permission. You don't have to keep pushing through and maybe risk burning yourself out or feeling sick or resentful and dreading every time you have to go to work or address a certain project or a team member. You can say, something's changed, I think it's beneficial to both parties to be honest about that. You're not going to do your
Exactly.
best work. You may harm the relationship in the long run, and that there's other ways to say yes. The positive no, compromise. I can't do this, but I can do this instead. I think that makes it a lot easier, and we don't have to fully commit. Maybe we partially commit. And sometimes we may just need to say no.
That's right. That's
Mhm.
right. And like
Lots
you
of
said,
options.
how can you say no in a way that's in integrity,
Right.
where people respond to how we show up. And so
Yeah.
if you show up very apologetically and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," and
Yes.
the other person responds to that, but if you show up with strength and say, "Thank you so much for thinking of me. Unfortunately, this isn't something I can fit in. Can I refer you to a colleague?" Or uh, "Can we look at another way I may be able to support on this?
Hmm.
This isn't something I can fit in. I have project A on my plate. I hear that project B is important. What would you like me to deprioritize?" That's such a
Right.
more grounded, coming from a position of strength that people respect, and you will, most importantly, that you'll feel better about.
Exactly. It is a position of strength to be honest about what capacity you have and what you can successfully complete. I think everyone will respect that information. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot.
I have worked with so many sensitive strivers over the years that come to me after receiving performance review feedback, or after not getting a promotion or a big project,
Mhm.
precisely because they are told, we don't think you know how to prioritize,
Right.
or we see you taking on so much, we're not sure if you can handle more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I offer that for anyone out there who feels like I'm trying to do all the things. I raise my hand for everything. And again, we're taught honor roll hangover. We're taught work really hard and you'll get noticed and rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
But ironically, the higher you rise, the more you go in your career, being able to say no, again, strategically and selectively,
Mm-hmm.
actually shows your leadership qualities more
Yes.
than just indiscriminately saying yes.
It's true. Discernment is the true strength.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's about quality of work, not quantity of work that's going to drive the needle forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think there is that misconception that we need to do everything. We need to show up everywhere. And that really dilutes what we have to offer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's one message you could leave listeners with who highly sensitive, potentially sensitive strivers who may be struggling with work and wanting to implement some of these ideas, what message would you leave them with?
I'll go back to that phrase, you teach people how to treat you,
Yes.
because it's so central. And if you think about it, we're all teaching people how to treat us every day. If we are constantly responding to messages at all hours of the day, you teach people that you're always available, right? Or if you're always volunteering or changing your schedule to accommodate other people, you teach people that you are willing to do that and that your
Mm-hmm.
time may not be that important. So think about that. Of course, relationships are always two-way streets, but you have more control than you think to shape what's happening around you. And I think that's important for HSPs and sensitive strivers to hear, because we often feel at the whim of everything that's happening around us. We often feel, because we're more sensitive, that we can't handle these situations. We can't handle the stress. We can't handle the demands. But you can, again, if you are taking care of yourself and treating yourself in the right way.
Mm-hmm. I love that takeaway. You have more control than you think. Coming back again to that trusting yourself, trusting what you have to offer, and being discerning about what you commit to, and just checking out, making sure you're finding some balance there. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So, Melly, I want to thank you so much for this conversation. So many amazing takeaways and so much more to dive into. I know that you offer a free chapter of your book, Trust Yourself, that I will include in the show notes for folks, along with your website and social media. Could you tell folks just a few? We mentioned it a bit, but could you tell folks a little bit more about the book?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. This has
Of
been a lot
course.
of fun.
It's been great.
Uh, yeah, Trust Yourself is really the culmination of my over a decade of coaching. I really wanted to give sensitive strivers a roadmap to being able to turn their sensitivity from something that feels like a liability in their careers specifically to something that feels like an asset, and that is an asset. So it is very practical, it's very tactical. There's lots of exercises and scripts and worksheets inside of the book. So if you are someone that relates to that intersection of high sensitivity and achievement, then it really is a roadmap for overcoming overthinking, not people pleasing, getting out of perfectionism, so much more.